Welcome to the Haunted Hour. Tonight, the rain isn't just water. It carries whispers, shadows, things that shouldn't exist. The storm hides something. Something that's watching you, listening, waiting. Turn off the lights, lock the doors, and if you hear a knock, don't answer. Because once you let it in, it never leaves.
I made that mistake 3 weeks ago during the worst storm our town had seen in decades. I pressed my ear against the cold glass of my bedroom window, curious about a sound that didn't belong among the natural rhythms of the storm. That's when everything in my life changed. That's when the dead started following me home. The day the storm came, I'd been living in my grandmother's house for exactly 17 days. Not that I was counting, except I was marking each morning with a small tally in my journal. 17 days since the funeral. 17 days alone in a house full of someone else's memories. I hadn't wanted to move to Millhaven. At 32, returning to your childhood vacation spot, to live in your dead grandmother's house feels like failure. But after the divorce, the job loss, and the eviction notice, I didn't have many options left. Grandma Eliza had left me the house in her will, a Victorian monstrosity on the outskirts of town, perched atop a small hill overlooking a dense forest. The locals called it Ravenwood House, though I never understood why. There wasn't a raven to be seen, just crows that gathered in the ancient oak tree outside my bedroom window, watching with unsettling intelligence. The storm had been building all day, dark clouds rolling in from the west, the air heavy with anticipation. Weather forecasts warned it could be historic, potentially dropping 8 inches of rain in 24 hours. I'd stocked up on candles, batteries, and non-perishable food. The power in these old houses was notoriously unreliable. By late afternoon, the sky had turned an unnatural shade of greenish black. The first fat raindrops hit my windows as I was heating soup on the stove, each one striking with such force it sounded like tiny pebbles being thrown against the glass. Within minutes, it was a deluge. Rain fell in sheets so thick I could barely see the oak tree 30 feet away. The ancient house creaked and moaned as wind battered its sides, finding every gap in the century-old construction. The power went first, plunging me into darkness broken only by flashes of lightning. I lit candles throughout the downstairs rooms, their flickering light creating a false sense of warmth as the temperature slowly dropped. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering the roof like thousands of impatient fingers drumming all at once. I curled up on the sofa with a battery-powered radio, listening to emergency broadcasts about flash flood warnings and road closures. Millhaven was effectively cut off now. The 2 bridges leading into town were underwater, and mudslides had blocked the mountain roads. That's when I first noticed the inconsistency in the rainfall, a pattern that didn't belong. Between thunderclaps, during moments when the rain briefly lessened its assault, there was something else, a rhythmic tapping against the bay window behind me. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Too deliberate to be random raindrops. Too consistent. I approached the window cautiously, watching as rivulets of water transformed the glass into a distorted lens. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the yard, empty except for rain-battered shrubs and the swaying branches of the oak tree. Tap, tap, tap. There it was again, this time against the kitchen window. I spun around, heart racing. Nothing visible through that window either. Just darkness and the relentless downpour. Old houses make noises, I said aloud, trying to convince myself, especially in storms. But the tapping continued, moving from window to window as if something was circling the house, testing each entry point. I followed the sound, candle in hand, from room to room, always finding nothing but my own frightened reflection staring back at me, until I reached Grandma Eliza's study. The the one room I'd avoided since moving in. The tapping there was different. Softer, more like a gentle scratch. And it wasn't coming from a window, but from the antique roll-top desk in the corner. The desk that contained all of Eliza's private papers, which I hadn't yet had the courage to sort through. As I approached, the scratching stopped. In the silence that followed, I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, nearly drowning out the storm outside. With trembling fingers, I pulled open the desk drawer where the sound had originated. Inside lay a leather-bound journal I hadn't seen before, its cover worn but free of dust, as if recently handled. Next to it sat a strange object, a small disc of black stone with symbols carved around its edge, cool to the touch despite the warmth of the drawer. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the house, and the momentary brilliance of lightning. I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the yard, tall, unnaturally thin, face upturned to the rain, staring directly at the study window. When darkness returned, I fumbled with the journal, opening to a random page. My grandmother's elegant handwriting filled the pages, but certain phrases leapt out at me. They only come in the rain. The disc keeps them at bay, but they're growing stronger. They've started asking for Margaret. I cannot let them have her. Margaret, my mother's name. Another flash of lightning, another glimpse of the figure, closer now, at the edge of the porch. In the brief illumination, I could see it more clearly. A woman in what appeared to be a long, old-fashioned dress, soaked through and clinging to an emaciated frame. Her head was tilted at an impossible angle, neck bent too far to one side. Her face remained in shadow. In the darkness that followed, I heard it clearly, not tapping now, but a voice, somehow audible over the storm, coming from directly outside the window. "We've been waiting for you, Emma. Let us in. We're so cold in the rain." My name. It knew my name. I backed away from the window, clutching the stone disc, so tightly my knuckles turned white. The voice came again, closer now, as if speaking directly into my ear. "Your grandmother kept us out, but she's gone now, and you've already listened to us. You've acknowledged us. Soon you'll have to let us in." A sudden, violent pounding shook the front door. Not the measured tapping from before, but desperate, furious impacts that made the hinges rattle. Through the beveled glass panels, I could see distorted silhouettes. Not one figure now, but many, press against the door. I ran to the living room, grabbing my phone to call for help, but the storm had killed the signal. The pounding intensified, spreading to every window and door around the house's perimeter, as if dozens of hands were trying to break in at once. In desperation, I opened my grandmother's journal again, frantically flipping pages until I found what looked like instructions. If they find you, create a circle of salt. Place the stone in the center. Recite their names backwards. Do not break the circle until the rain stops. Names? What names? I rifled through more pages until I found a list. Isabel Thorne, 1887 to 1912. Samuel Wicker, 1843 to 1901. Josephine Marsh, 1921 to 1943. William Blackwood, 1790 to 1856. Rebecca Cotton, 1905 to 1932. 5 names. 5 people who had died long ago. Below them, my grandmother had written, "They were the first to hear the rain. They opened the way." The pounding had become so violent that the front door was beginning to splinter. I could hear with cracking, the distinct sound of breaking glass from somewhere upstairs. They were getting in. I ran to the kitchen, finding a container of salt in the pantry. With shaking hands, I made a circle in the center of the living room, placed a stone disc in the middle, and stepped inside, journal clutched to my chest. As the first of the windows gave way upstairs, I began reciting the names backwards, my voice barely audible over the storm and the sounds of intrusion. Cotton Rebecca, Blackwood William, Marsh Josephine, Wicker Samuel, Thorn Isabel. The effect was instantaneous. The pounding stopped. The house fell silent except for the ongoing rage of the storm outside. I stood frozen in my salt circle, straining to hear any movement. Then the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of my face. The candles throughout the room dimmed to tiny blue flames that barely pushed back the darkness. And they appeared, not all at once. They faded in like developing photographs, each one materializing in a different part of the room. 5 figures in period clothing from different eras, each bearing the marks of violent deaths. Isabel with a bruised neck, Samuel with a gaping chest wound, Josephine's dress stained with dark patches, William missing half his face, Rebecca dripping endless water onto my grandmother's antique rug. They formed a circle around me, just beyond the boundary of salt, their forms flickering like bad television reception. Their mouths moved in perfect unison, but the voice that emerged seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. We've been patient, Emma. We've waited for Harper to return. Your grandmother denied us for decades. But you're different. You hear us. You see us. What do you want? My voice was barely a whisper. What everyone wants. To be warm again. To be dry. To feel. The rain keeps us here, between places. Neither living nor properly dead. But with your help, we can cross over. I don't understand. How can I help you? 5 pairs of eyes, milky and vacant, fixed on me with terrible hunger. We need a vessel, just for a little while. A living body to anchor us, to remind us how to be human. Then we can move on. Possession? I breathed, understanding dawning. You want to possess me? Rebecca's form drifted closer to the salt line, her drowned face twisted in what might have been meant as a smile. 5 of us, 5 nights. Each of us takes a turn. When the last has remembered what it is to live, we'll depart. You have our word. And if I refuse? The 5 spirits exchange glances, their forms growing more solid, more threatening. Then we take what we need. Your grandmother couldn't keep us out forever. The barrier thins with each storm. We'll come back night after night until you break. Or until we find someone else who hears the rain. Perhaps that nice young man who delivers your groceries. Or the mail carrier. Or the children down the road. My blood ran cold. You hurt innocent people? William's half-face twisted in what might have been amusement. Innocence is relative, Emma Harper. Ask your grandmother. Ask about the pact your family made with us a century ago. Ask why the Harpers have always heard us in the rain. Outside, lightning struck the oak tree with a deafening crack. Through the window, I watched as its massive trunk split down the middle, one half crashing onto the lawn. In that moment of distraction, Rebecca lunged forward, passing through the salt line as if it wasn't there. Cold hands gripped my shoulders, her touch burning like ice. Water filled my lungs though I stood in a dry room. I was drowning on solid ground. Time to listen, Emma. They spoke in unison. The rain won't last forever. Part 2, the possession. I woke up on the living room floor, salt scattered around me, sunlight streaming through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear blue morning and devastating wreckage throughout the yard. The fallen oak had crushed my car beneath its massive trunk, and debris littered the sodden lawn. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it had been a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination brought on by isolation and the violent storm. But as I sat up, pain lanced through my body. My clothes were soaking as though I'd been indoors all night. Bruises in the shape of fingerprints marked my shoulders. And most disturbing of all, a message was written in the condensation on the living room window. 5 nights, 5 souls. We begin tonight. I spent the day in a frenzy of research, poring over my grandmother's journal for answers. The entries dated back decades, detailing her encounters with what she called the Rain People and her efforts to keep them contained. According to her notes, they had first appeared in Millhaven in 1887, after an unusually long drought broke with catastrophic flooding that killed 5 residents. Since then, they had returned with every major storm, seeking human vessels. My grandmother had discovered the warding stone disc in the ruins of an old church and had used it, along with other protective measures, to keep them at bay. But she wrote with increasing concern that their power was growing with each manifestation. Most disturbing were her references to a pact made by my great-great-grandfather, Solomon Harper. Apparently, he had struck some sort of deal with the entities in 1912, but the specifics were frustratingly vague. All I could gather was that the Harper family had promised something in exchange for the town's safety, a debt that remained unpaid. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. Another storm was coming, smaller than last night's, but still significant. The weather radio warned of heavy rainfall beginning around midnight. I tried calling for help, but the storm had damaged cell towers and landlines throughout the county. The roads remained impassable due to flooding and debris. I was trapped at Ravenwood House for at least another day, possibly longer, with no escape possible. I prepared as best I could. I reinforced the salt circle in the living room, adding protective symbols copied from my grandmother's journal. I gathered candles, water, and the stone disc. Then I waited, watching the sky darken as clouds rolled in. The rain began gently this time, a soft patter against the windows that gradually increased in intensity. I sat cross-legged in the center of my salt circle, the journal open before me, grandmother's disc clutched in my hand. At exactly midnight, every candle in the room extinguished simultaneously. The temperature dropped so rapidly that frost formed on the inside of the windows. And in the darkness, Rebecca Cotton appeared, alone this time, her drowned form more solid than before. "My turn first," she said, her voice clearer now, less ethereal. "Thank you for not running, Emma. It makes this easier." "I want to understand," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What happened to you? Why can't you move on?" Rebecca drifted around the perimeter of my circle, leaving wet footprints on the hardwood floor. "I drowned in the flood of 1932. Not an accident. I was held under by my fiancé when I threatened to expose his affair. But that's not why I'm trapped." She pressed a pale hand against an invisible barrier at the edge of the salt. "We're all here because of what happened after our deaths. Because of what Solomon Harper did." "My great-great-grandfather? What did he do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca smiled, though it was devoid of warmth. "He bargained with us, promised us peace, a path to beyond, in exchange for something precious. But he never fulfilled his end of the deal. Instead, he bound us here, tethered to the rain, neither living nor dead. And now we take what is owed." The storm outside intensified, the wind howling through the eaves, rattling the windows as if the house itself was alive and breathing. I gripped the stone disc tighter. There has to be another way. What if I finish what Solomon started? What if I find a way to set you free without taking me? Rebecca tilted her head, considering. A bold offer, but the others won't wait. They're hungry, Emma, and they know you're listening. A crack of thunder split the air, and suddenly the room was filled with them, the other four spirits, their forms half solid, their eyes hollow voids that reflected nothing. The air turned oppressive, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. 5 nights, 5 souls. "The storm is our gate," Samuel Wicker intoned. "Resist, and we will claim another. Accept, and you may yet bargain for your life." I swallowed hard. If I fought, they would move on to someone else, someone unaware, someone defenseless. If I agreed, if I gave them my body, even temporarily, maybe I could find a way to turn the pact against them. Lightning flashed again, illuminating their expectant faces. My heart pounded. "One night," I said. "One of you. If I survive, you let me go." They exchanged glances. William Blackwood grinned, his ruined face stretching impossibly wide. A test. How thrilling. Before I could react, Rebecca lunged, her fingers icy daggers sinking into my skin. Darkness swallowed me whole. I woke to the sensation of drowning. Water surged into my lungs, cold and unrelenting, pulling me downward. I flailed, but my limbs didn't respond. I wasn't in my body anymore. I was in hers. Through blurred vision, I saw the riverbank, the moon hanging low in the sky. Hands, not my own, clawed at the muddy shore, desperate for air. Above me, a shadow loomed. Her fiancé, the one who betrayed her. He pressed down harder, forcing Rebecca beneath the water. I screamed, though no sound escaped. But this time, I wasn't powerless. I was not Rebecca Cotton. I was Emma Harper, and I was not going to drown. I wrenched free from his grip. With a strength that wasn't mine, twisting, kicking, he stumbled, and suddenly I was above him. Without thinking, I pressed down, shoving his face into the river, holding him there as he had held her. His struggles weakened, then ceased. The moment he stopped moving, the world around me shattered. I gasped awake, back in my own body, sprawled in the salt circle. Rebecca was gone, her presence nothing more than a lingering chill. The storm outside had eased, the rain now a mere whisper, but the others remained, watching, waiting. "One night down," Josephine Marsh murmured. "4 to go." A cold dread settled in my stomach. I had survived, but the real horror had just begun. The second night, I faced William Blackwood, who had died of wounds no living man should have endured. The third, Josephine, who had been murdered in her sleep. Each night, they pulled me into their deaths, forcing me to relive their pain, their fear, their final moments. But each time I fought back, I rewrote their endings. I defied the rain. By the fifth night, only Samuel remained, the oldest, the most powerful. And as I sat in my salt circle, exhausted and fraying at the edges of sanity, I realized something. The rain wasn't their prison. It was their key. I flipped through my grandmother's journal, searching desperately until I found it. Solomon Harper's unfinished ritual, a binding but also a release, a way to sever their ties to the storm forever. But it required sacrifice, blood, a Harper's blood. I took a deep breath, picking up the rusted knife my grandmother had hidden in the desk. As the storm raged outside, as Samuel's presence loomed closer, I did what had to be done. The blade bit into my palm. Blood dripped onto the stone disc. I spoke the words written over a century ago, the syllables foreign and jagged on my tongue. Samuel screamed. The others joined him, their forms twisting, unraveling, pulled toward the windows as the storm devoured them. The house trembled. The rain outside became a deafening roar, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the spirits were gone. The storm had passed. The first light of dawn crept through the shattered windows. I stumbled outside, the wet earth cold beneath my feet. The oak tree stood where it had fallen, split and broken, but the house, the land, the very air felt lighter, as if something terrible had finally been lifted. A single crow sat on the porch railing, watching me with dark, knowing eyes. Then it spread its wings and took flight, disappearing into the clear morning sky. I didn't need to count the days anymore. I was free.
The shadows are growing, and the horrors are just beginning. If you think this was terrifying, you haven't seen anything yet. More nightmares await, lurking in the dark corners of the haunted hour. Subscribe now, before the darkness takes you too. And don't forget to turn on notifications, because the next story might just find you first. See you in the dark.